Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ginny Van Duzen, Director of Alumni Career Development here at Holy Cross, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Multigenerational Workforce, Finding Common Ground. This is the next installment in our series of web-based presentations covering a broad range of career development topics. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Andrea Fonte Weaver from the class of 1992. Andrea is the founder and executive director of Bridges Together, a not-for-profit charitable organization dedicated to empowering leaders to unite generations, and she is a thought leader in the intergenerational field, internationally renowned for her work. We'll be together for a little under an hour today. Andrea will speak and will then take questions from you for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation by checking out the question function located on your webinar toolbar to the right. Thank you again for joining us, and now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Andrea.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. And Ginny, thank you for the opportunity to present. Really excited to share this with you and look forward to your questions and your feedback. So, today we will explore the themes and characteristics of the different generations, learn some other lenses in which that we can use to understand people, and then identify steps that each of us can take to unite different generations. So just to give you a quick background, I grew up in a multi-generational Italian family. I lived across the street from my mom's parents in Watertown, Massachusetts, and I spent summers, a lot of summers in Italy with my dad's parents, which is where this was taken. And today on the as we celebrate the saints that have gone before us, I'm grateful for my family that taught me that people of all ages can live together and be enriched by each other's lives. So on the right is on the very right is Professor Ainley. He was my advisor at Holy Cross. And I wanted to take a class with him, and the only thing that fit into my schedule was Intro to Gerontology. I had been scarred or traumatized going to a nursing home when I was a child, and I thought all older adults were in nursing homes, and I didn't want to enter one. But in his class, I learned about the 5% fallacy, that only 5% of Americans had lived in nursing homes, and that was consistent for 95 years, now for 125 years. So I had this aha moment that I could work with 95% of older adults, like my grandparents and other people in my life, and not have to be in a nursing home. Since then, I've come to appreciate and have frequently visited relatives in nursing homes. But that launched my whole career, because then I went on and became part of the Worcester Consortium in gerontology. And then I graduated with my master's in intergenerational studies also. So while I was studying with Professor Ainley, I learned about the field of intergenerational programming and decided to focus in on that, and designed a program called Bridges that's in the schools, where 8 active older adults go in and work with students, which is what this picture was taken in one of those classrooms in 1991. The Bridges program is still going on. It's used across the country now. It's impacted over 16,000 lives since its inception, and the people who had been impacted are the ones that asked me to spread it, and that's what I responded to that call in 2012 and founded Bridges Together. We are now an internationally renowned center for training and tools on intergenerational engagement between older adults and younger people. So when we meet a Crusader, we feel an instant bond, and we start with some notions, some preconceived notions, some expectations of that person's going to be so excited to meet us too, a sense of a commitment to our mission, whatever our mission is. We, in general, are very driven, passionate people. We have a sense of intellectual curiosity. And we expect that all of us considered Mount St. James our home. And it feels good. It feels comfortable. When we talk about generations, we start with those same generalizations. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But when we have generalizations, we often come with expectations and assumptions too. And then stereotypes develop. And that's what generational descriptors are. When we talk about the baby boomers or Generation X or millennials, we're talking about generalizations, and we bring a sense of expectations and assumptions to someone who belongs to that generational category. So we're going to dive in now. And a book that I found really helpful in understanding the generations is The Generational Imperative by Chuck Underwood. You can see it pictured up on the top. It's a quick read, and he proposes that our formative years are while we are in school full time. So if someone drops out of school in 8th grade to support their family, or high school to support their family, or begin a trade, if they go on to get their bachelor's, or if they go on to get their doctorate, those are all considered formative years. But once we enter the workplace or leave that school, our formation for the most part is done. And it's because schools provide some innovative thinking and cutting edge thought that really helps to shape who we are. And so we can take that concept of our formative years and overlay it with Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. I'm not going to dive into it, but what he says is that each of us is formed by our microsystems, the people we see on a daily basis, exosystems that we see regularly, how those interact, which is the mesosystem, and then the macrosystem is what's going on in the world. And as we age, or the chronos, those systems all change. So when I was a child, who was in my microsystem is different than who's in my microsystem today when I'm 47 years of age. Likewise, if I take a kindergartner from 1950 and a kindergartner from today, who's in their microsystems and their exosystems and what's going on in the world is very different. And when we combine all of this, when we combine this exosystem, that is how culture and generations come to be. So enough with that, but I just wanted to give you a framework, and I really believe that it's important to understand some of the social science and the theories. And once we understand these theories, like Bronfenbrenner, we can read something like The Generational Imperative or read about generations and have a structure in which to put that information. So the first generation that some of you still might be working with is silence, and these might be people actually in the workplace, but they might also be people that you serve or people that support you. They are now 92 to 72 years of age. They often have good manners, a strong work ethic, and are disciplined, very private, and respect authority. In general, they're team players and consensus builders. They don't like to rock the boat, and some of them might still be working. Tips for working with silence. They like personal attention. Recognize that we need to recognize that silence may not mean that they're disinterested. It's just that's their way of life. They would do better to be trained in person. And as we're thinking about silence, we also need to be thinking about who's in their circles of love. And this is true for all of us. Bob Vanderson, the man in this picture, was one of my very first Bridges volunteers in 1991. And recently I went back to visit him and his wife, Alice. And so recognizing, like, who are the people in their circles, in their microsystems and mesosystems. So that's the silent generation. Just to pause and give you a moment on statistics here, the projections for 2025 in the United States are that we will have more adults over the age of 65 than children under the age of 13. So after World War II, our communities rallied to support this boom of babies. We developed things like pediatricians and elementary schools. And as the baby boomers have aged, they have helped to shape and refine our society with the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement and so many other LGBTQ movements. And they've done a lot of groundwork and opened up a lot of opportunities, and that will continue as they age. There are 10,000 Americans who are turning 65 every day, and they can expect to live about 20 more years. This additional life is often called the longevity bonus, and it's up to each of us about how do we tap into and take advantage of in a positive way this longevity bonus. People aged 85 and older is the fastest growing segment of the population. It's important to note that the predictions are 40% of these people suffer from some type of cognitive impairment. And so to be mindful of that, and that's why all the work that's being done on brain health is so important. In 2015, there were an estimated 40 million family caregivers who helped with activities of daily living. That means like bathing, toileting, things like that. That's what activities of daily living means. 60% of these caregivers are employed, and 25% are millennials, and 40% are men. So when we're talking about generations in the workplace, we need to be mindful that many of our employees are probably caregiving. And that is something that weighs on caregivers. It's not something that's easily pushed out of our minds. Average grandparents see their grandchildren once every 3 weeks, which is down from previous generations. But multi-generational households are actually on the rise now, which is pretty exciting. And that's a whole new field of designing these homes. So getting back to our generations, baby boomers were born from 1946 to 1964. The numbers get reversed. They're now 71 to 53 years of age. Baby boomers, like silence, have institutional knowledge. Many of them have worked at the same place for many years, even decades, and they know the history. It's important to tap into that. These baby boomers believe that work equals vitality and engagement. They're often choosing to work beyond retirement age because they want to stay connected or because they have to. They did not expect to live on their retirement funds for 20 years. And so that's a big issue. They like to socialize with colleagues. Ethics and values are really important. They can often be considered assertive and aggressive because they've had to. They had to compete from college all the way up for everything because there were so many. They do play by the rules, but they will challenge the rules. Tips for working with boomers: create some sort of structure to systematically transfer their knowledge. Recognize that they will work productively until they retire, and a lot of people are choosing to semi-retire or to consult and not to just stop cold turkey. Offer retirement transition support can be very helpful. Give choices and flexibility, including part-time work. I just heard that the average millennial works at the same place for under 2 years, and these baby boomers who are working after retirement can stay for more than 2 years. So it's one of the ways that kind of ageism in some ways. Baby boomers might consider a lateral move because they want to have more flexibility and they don't want the responsibility of managing other people. So my little screen is blocked. Okay. I want to share some new vocabulary with you. We used to hear about the sandwich generation, but it's now being called the panini generation. We're getting squished, caregiving for older and younger relatives, and it's more intense level of caregiving. I just heard a visiting nurse say that 20 years ago, when she went to visit someone in their home, she would do a blood pressure check and just overall listen to their heart. Now she can be called in to change IVs and administer IV medications and wound care. That 20 years ago, that would have been done in a hospital or a skilled nursing facility. So families are having to care, and caregivers are having to carry this burden too. So grandfamilies and kinship care are on the rise. Grandfamilies are grandparents who take in their grandchildren or even great-grandchildren. And kinship care are aunts, uncles, and other relatives who take in children to support them. So there are organizations dedicated to both, and there's a lot of laws that are being passed to help support these families. But some of your workers are probably grandfamilies or providing kinship care. Middlescence and emerging adulthood are two new terms. Middlescence is the kind of 50s mid to late 50s, where people are reinventing themselves, choosing different careers, taking a sabbatical, even if they don't work in academia, a year off to kind of explore themselves and figure out what they want to do with the next third of their lives, which is sometimes called the third age. Emerging adulthood is the years 18 to 25. And this is a new phenomenon which has come about for many, many societal factors have contributed to this emerging adulthood. And adulting is now a verb. So you can think about it in terms of the people in your life. Generativity is about being generous and generating. And we're hearing being generous in terms of our time, our money, our knowledge, and then generating and being creative, creating artwork, creating consulting opportunities, creating new organizations or opportunities for volunteering. Mentors and sponsors. So many of us have heard about mentors, but along with that are sponsors. And the difference is that sponsors create opportunities for people to get ahead and to make a difference. So they might invite someone to do a talk. They might make sure. It's a difference between just saying, when I was starting my career, this is what I needed, and making sure that someone that you're sponsoring actually has all the tools, the resources, the connections to be successful. Along with this, and this generativity and mentoring and sponsoring all kind of goes with middle-essence and this mid-career where we want to generate and be generous and help someone else. Encore careers are the career that happens after the longer career that we've had, as Encore suggests. But there is also an organization called Encore. It's a national organization that's helping people 50 and older find careers for the common good. Doing good for the common good is their slogan. And so actually some big companies are paying a stipend for their employees to be involved with Encore, so that they can start to pursue other options, especially if they're in risk or on the docket to be laid off or after they've been laid off. So the last thing I wanted to point out is a flexible structure. And in intergenerational and multi-generational engagement, flexible structure is really important. What it says is that we provide some sort of structure, but how it gets carried out is flexible because each person can put their thumbprint on it. So, for example, Holy Cross said to Ginny, we're going to do, I'm not really sure how it came about, but for example, Holy Cross might have said to Ginny, I want you to put together a monthly webinar series for alumni. And that was the structure that she was given, for example. I'm not sure it's a completely accurate example, but she had flexibility in who she wanted to have as the guest speakers and what the topics would be. So getting back to the Generation X is now, was born from about 1965 to 1985, ranging from 52 to 33 years of age. The Generation X came from the math term, like X plus Y, where X could be any number. And Generation X was very individualistic and independent, very results-oriented crew. Generation Xers grew up watching out for themselves. Many of their parents, both parents worked, and so they were latchkey kids. They also had their parents had the highest divorce rate ever in the United States, and so that had a huge impact too. Because of all those things, they were very self-reliant and self-focused. Multitaskers, because they watch their parents work so hard and not necessarily be around for them. They want a work and family balance. And so they definitely like to have fun and they like to socialize, but they don't like to socialize at work. But they do like to have fun at work. And so actually in my husband's workplace, they actually have Nerf guns that they shoot at each other regularly, if you can go figure that. So I was pretty surprised when my husband just ordered one to join in the fun. At our board meeting, we did a whole thing on a whole exercise on the different hats that we wear. and which comes from a book written about the different perspectives that we bring, but we actually got different caps for people to wear, including a Minnie Mouse hat. And together we planned a trip as a fundraiser to Disney World. So that's an example of how we can have fun at work. Creative and entrepreneurial, and we're not so trusting of authority. We saw our parents get laid off a lot, saw some things with the government, and so like Watergate, and so that we're a little bit apprehensive. Tips for working with Gen Xers: do not micromanage. Give plenty of resources, feedback, and opportunities for input, like that flexible structure. Train on the application that you're working on, not on the theories behind it. Like, how is this going to be useful for Generation X? Train in visual and brief interviews. Generation X grew up with Sesame Street, 2 to 3 minute segments on a whole bunch of different topics that all tied together under one theme. Remember, we had the letter and the number of the day. So it's that same concept. It's visual, it's brief, and it's intervals on common themes. Establish clear goals and quantify performances. Also establish a retention program. For example, some places will say the more weeks, the more each year you're there, you get an extra day of vacation or something like that, or we put more money into your 401k so that people will be inclined to stay. Generation X was the first generation in the United States that grew up with a mass exodus from their extended family. It's when airplanes came out, and so it became really easy to travel pretty inexpensively too, travel long distance and inexpensively. It's also the first time that companies became really national and started moving employees across the country. And so Generation X actually grew up without regular contact with their grandparents. And some say that has actually increased to Generation Xers' fear of older adults and aging. Since the 1970s, we have become very age segregated in our society. If we start with economics, I think that moving is part of it. The other thing is dual income families. So at an earlier time in our history, when moms traditionally stayed home, they could take the grandparents they could visit with the grandparents regularly, or if we lived in neighborhoods with extended family, that was available. But if both parents are working, that's trickier to do. Another thing is stores being open on Sundays. So then people were working and people were shopping and not necessarily visiting with older adults. And once stores opened up, then sports opened up on Sundays also. So that was another breakdown. The size of our homes we have moved from triple deckers around World War II out to suburbs after World War II. And then even across the country, the sizes of our houses have gotten bigger. So even if we live in the same house, we might withdraw to different rooms in the house. Our families have changed dramatically. More single parent families and other logistics about who is in a family, but also with blended families and remarried families. There's now 6 and 8 sets of grandparents, and that really changes the dynamics too. And divorce has a huge impact on grandparents seeing their grandchildren, especially for the dad's parents. So technology, while we are more connected, which is great, it's often at a superficial level, and these younger generations are coming up using technology to communicate with each other and not being comfortable having face-to-face communication. So that's a concern. And we have so many fears. I think actually the stranger danger of the 1980s did a lot of harm because we couldn't trust our neighbors anymore, as well as fear of litigation. Now fears of food allergies, fears of how are we going to afford college, pay off college, afford retirement, how are our children and grandchildren going to afford these things, how are they going to afford their home. I think the average cost of a home in terms of a salary has quadrupled since the 1970s. So, and the demographics, we talked about some of them, but girls who were born in the 1990s in the United States can expect to live to be over 100. So what does that look like? What does it look to be a 70-year-old, an 80-year-old, a 90-year-old, a 100-year-old. We are looking at the baby boomers in the silence to help us figure that out and give us positive role models and realistic role models. So getting back to the millennials, were born around 1986, and we're not really sure what the cutoff year is going to be on the other side, around 2000. So they range from about 31 to 17 years of age. In general, millennials are disciplined, optimistic, and they're competitive. There are more millennials than there are baby boomers. They are eager to do well, to be a winner, and to do good. Many of them experienced September 11th when we all came out to support each other through that tragedy. Many of them got blue ribbons. Everybody was a winner on the soccer field. Everybody got their trophy. And so that had a huge impact on this generation. They are comfortable on teams. They worked in groups in classrooms as opposed to desks that were bolted down as in previous generations. They appreciate diversity, grew up with that, and they actually appreciate their elders and feel more comfortable than their parents in general. They're great with deadlines and testing. They grew up with a lot of standardized testing. They are often not independent creative thinkers nor risk takers because it was all so structured for them. They are seeking more money and responsibility, and the average tenure is 1 to 2 years at a company. Tips for working with Gen Xers: offer a robust orientation program and get them moving on work quickly. You need to give structure with clear guidelines and explain the importance of tedious tasks. That tediousness is not something that comes naturally to this crew. Help them learn early and often, both on and off site. Present areas for improvement in a positive way. They are not necessarily used to negative feedback. So if you're going to deliver it, try to do it in a positive way. They might need some help learning etiquette, workplace ethics, realistic expectations, even communication with technology and things like that. How do you communicate effectively? Rewarding them with more responsibility will lead to increased loyalty. So, and here, pictured here is myself and Marilee Gonzalez. I want to give a shout out to Holy Cross's alumni that offers a shadowing program where during vacations, alumni can host a current student who's interested in your line of work. And so Marilee was interested in nonprofits and came to shadow me one day and actually attended one of our trainings last fall, and we were so impressed with her that we offered her an internship in the spring. And so this picture was taken the day that we had her graduation party here at the office. I think another example of having fun together. And then I ended up hiring her part-time for the summer, which was really great. So next, hold on one second. Next is Generation Z. They're born around the year 2000, ranging from 22 to about 7 years. That's not right. Sorry, those years are off. 17 to newborns. They are multitaskers. They are the first generation that really grew up with technology in their hands. They grew up with examples like Mark Zuckerberg and that whole entrepreneurial mindset, and you can still be successful and be a millionaire if you don't go to college. There's a commitment to helping others, as they've grown up with so many tragedies on our homeland, and they're global in their thinking. Beyond that, we don't really know. They're just emerging. So give examples of personal and corporate integrity. Integrity is really important, and we know that this culture right now isn't necessarily talking about integrity. Make clear the opportunities for advancement and what it's going to take in order to get there. Mentor them and give them feedback on a frequent basis. Again, keeping it positive. And we'll see what other tips are helpful as we go with this crew. So, So in concluding, as we look at the generations, and we'll break off into another section a little, I love this quote from Chuck Underwood in the book. We have virtually no control over the year we're born, so we also have no control over the unique times and teachings that will occur during our formative years and will mold our generation's unique and lifelong core values. When we all acknowledge this fundamental truth, we suddenly find ourselves making peace with the different values and attitudes of the other generations. And we then start rooting for those generations to find their own success and happiness in life, given the hand they were dealt with in childhood. And we hope that they'll understand our generation's unique values and start rooting for us too. And by embracing that outlook, America's generation gaps begin to shrink. Well, we talked about the generations. It's really important to really drill down to what the individual, who are the individuals. So each of us is born into a generation, but each of us is unique too. So these are some of the human development theories that I use to understand the people in my life, both professionally and personally. On the left is the whole person concept. What is going on with the person physically, socially, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually? And so if I have someone who's having some memory loss, is there something else that they can be involved in? If I have someone who broke a leg, what do I need to do to support that person? And I include the spiritual because a lot of times when we bring together the different generations in a positive way, there's a synergy that comes out of it. And especially with older adults and children, people or young people will talk about the magic of it. To me, that's spirituality. It also can be a way that we identify, if we ourselves are spiritual, we can identify with someone else. And it's different than practicing in an organized religion. I was asked to present at a international conference a couple weeks ago as a panelist, and the woman who invited me talked about how she meditates every morning. And the other woman who I was speaking with, we had a long heart-to-heart about our careers, and at the end I said, what advice do you have for me? And she bowed her head and prayed with me. And totally, it was the first time I'd really met her. It caught me off guard, but to me, both of those examples helped me understand that those two women are very spiritual. So in different ways, but they're spiritual. So the next one is the multiple intelligences theory that says there's different ways that we are smart. And so if we understand that someone's really great with words, plugging them into something that uses words like writing or editing, or asking them to help in on that task versus someone who might be picture smart. If we're moving offices and we need help decorating, we might pull in that person, or of course the logic smart with all our engineers. So I know many people are doing strength assessments, and but the multiple intelligences is another way. It came out in the 1980s by Howard Gardner, and then teachers started using it in their classrooms and then teaching kids. When they started teaching children about this theory, it became known as the SMARTS theory, and we use child-friendly language with this. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that we have some basic needs that need to be met before we can move on to psychological needs and eventually self-fulfillment. So I think that this is really important in our workplaces as we look at what's going on for our employees. If they are being paid such low wages that they don't have enough money for food, or to have their homes heat and cooled properly, then we can talk to them about becoming their best self, or what are their growth plans, but they're not going to be there because they're on the bottom. And what are our policies and procedures, and where do they fall in here? So it's just another framework to understand the people in our lives. Joan and Erik Erikson published Erikson's Socio-Emotional development theory, and it's the first theory that said that we continue to develop beyond adolescence. So in the workplace, we're talking about early adulthood and developing intimate relationships. But it's also, in that is relationships between managers and those whom they manage, especially in these young adults. And then they published, I think, in the 50s. Now that we are living longer, we need a couple more stages in here, but we talked about generativity. And integrity is kind of in the 70s and 80s, before people's bodies begin to fail, but in their minds begin to fail, if some of that might happen. But integrity is about looking back over your life and thinking about the ways that we were successful, the challenges we had, how we handled them, and getting to a point that we realized that we made a difference in this world. And so pulling on that, asking older adults to share their institutional knowledge can help, or to write a history of their experience at your company or your company itself, can help with the integrity stage. With all of this, we also have to recognize the impact of ethnicity and culture. So immigrants and first generation, that ethnicity and culture is really strong. In fact, immigrants might be trying to be more Americanized, perhaps. First generation, keeping it alive, and how does that all play out? And then by second generation, what's going on? And the ways that families handle it over the multiple generations, and generations handle it in their own families as they look at each generation, is different. But this does impact who we are. We need to recognize, I think, that ageism does exist. It's the discrimination against people of a different age, often older adults, due to negative and inaccurate stereotypes. One of the biggest things I think we face is that we don't want to hire older workers because we're afraid they're going to retire or get sick. That's discrimination. When we think about how do we address ageism, we need to think about and utilize tools that have been effective in addressing racism and sexism and some of the other isms in the workplace, recognizing that we still have a long way to go, I think, with those, but we have made some progress. Some of the things that I think are helpful is recognizing Allport's contact hypothesis, which was also published in the 1950s. He said that in order to reduce prejudice, we need 4 components. We need the different parties at the table, engaged with one another, working on a common project, collaborating as peers. There's no experts, there's no subordinates, but it's endorsed by authority figures. And so building this out, we can think about developing a multi-generational leadership team or task force with representatives from the different generations. There's been a lot of talk recently about having people in your personal and professional life from each decade. And so I'm really excited that we just hired someone in her 30s, which brings us we have the decades covered now from 30s through the 70s between staff and board. So can you do the same thing? And this multi-generational leadership team can get together, decide on what kind of program or approach they want, receive training, work their plan, evaluate it, and then reconvene to decide on what the next steps are. I think that it's really critical to foster a culture that leads to a multi-generational community in the workplace, and that sense of community is so important. I think establishing a core set of values together that you can refer back to, breaking bread together and sharing meals is really a great way to get to know one another. And it's when we get to know one another, when we understand the individuality, when we understand what we have in common, that those differences start to break away, and we are no longer a Generation Xer or a baby boomer, but we are a person who is rich in experiences, who just happens to be in this generation. Recognize each person as an individual with strengths and areas for growth, regardless of what generation they're in, and provide opportunities for people to share what is meaningful for them. Because when we share what's meaningful for each of us, then those barriers start to break down. So some examples that we've used here at Bridges Together and some of our colleagues have used. One, when you are sharing a meal or before a meeting, go around and ask everybody what's one thing they're grateful for that day. So, and if you build it into the culture, even those who, and prepare those, even those who are not necessarily comfortable with this will get used to it and start looking forward to it and start thinking about what are they grateful for that day, which can have a huge shift in culture. There's tool called the Rose Check-in. It's being used in schools, and we've used it effectively in trainings, where I learned it at home between my niece and my dad. But you go around and say, what's a rose, something beautiful that happened? What's a thorn, or something that was tricky? And what's a bud, something that you hope moving forward? And so you can use it. I've used it even in reports to foundations, and it's been very well received. One of the local companies is now doing a lunch unplugged, where every Wednesday they get together for lunch, not to talk about work, but to just get to know each other and enjoy each other. And they've put together a team that's planning those, and they're using actually the multiple intelligences to plan their different themes. Lastly, at Bridges Together, we offer grand conversations cards. It's one deck, as you can see here, of about 40 questions that are appropriate for people of all ages and start meaningful conversations. So those are available for purchase on our website, but many companies are using them as icebreakers, using them in trainings, keeping them on their lunch tables to help people get to know one another. Some policies you might consider in the workplace: committing to hire older workers and people from every decade, and putting energy into that and putting resources into that, as well as training for your current staff in welcoming these people. How do you change that culture to be age welcoming? Offer assistance in preparing for retirement, including part and flex time for older workers, including age, where you identify race and gender. One of the big things I'm hearing about is establishing opt-out retirement plans, where the company says, we are going to put 2% of your money into a retirement plan, 2% of your paycheck. If you don't want it, then you need to opt out and let us know. I was just at a state, the Governor Baker in Massachusetts has established a council on aging with about 20 leaders from across the state, and there was an HR director there of, I think, about 500 employees. And he said he decided to do this, and only one person opted out. And he said, I don't know what came over me, but this year I actually increased it to 3%, and no one complained. So it's a great way to help people start preparing for retirement. Consider caregiving time off, or even on-site elder care. So many places have child care, but elder care is a bigger issue and a growing issue. Stride Right actually established an elder care and intergenerational care center in the 1980s and early 90s that was innovative. And can your company follow suit? Offer paid time off for volunteering, including serving on boards. Serving on boards can be a wonderful way to transition, to share expertise, to build community, to build relationships with other organizations and companies. But it also, for someone who retires, it can help be a bridge once they lose the community of the workplace. And invest in intergenerational programming that systematically brings older adults and children together. And it's not just the ones that we see preschools and nursing homes, but there's so much more. Programs in schools, programs to teach reading, service programs. It runs a big span. But just as MathWorks and other companies realized that there weren't people entering engineering, they didn't have prepared workers, and especially girls, they invested in the schools and started to get kids excited about engineering and math, and they developed this whole concept of STEAM education. We need to do the same thing so that we have workers who are prepared and committed to multi-generational workforces. Some of the procedures you might implement or creating a multi-generational leadership team. Start your meetings by asking people to share. Use that rose or gratitude, because it's going to start to see what we have in common. Present issues and gather input from people in each generation. Recognize and value people's individuality and experiences. When sharing new information, start with our commonalities and use those to exemplify the new information and techniques. So what's something that we all have in common? And then where can we take that to see how do we differ now? And so especially when we're training older workers, to go back and say, think about when XYZ happened. So this is how it's the same, this is how it's different. When managing older people, ask for advice. They've lived longer, they have more accumulated information and wisdom in general. But then we have the courage to speak up and say what you need to say. Create leadership opportunities for younger generations, and then use the same approaches that were successful for race and gender inclusion. So I am now eager to hear your questions and hopefully provide some answers. I do want to let you know too that we are here to help you and your team. We do multi-generational leadership team trainings on site and webinars. Our Bridges program is available for use in schools with older adults. We also do help people develop their own intergenerational programs, and we actually have some grants to bring the Bridges program to different schools in Massachusetts and possibly New Hampshire and Rhode Island. So if you're interested in that, let us know. On our website, we have lots of how-to guides. We do webinars and presentations, and I would love to hear from you. My contact information is here. So we can connect on LinkedIn as well. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and we do a monthly or twice a month e-news if you're interested in that. So questions?
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Why don't we start with this one's kind of interesting. Do you think there are commonalities between millennials and boomers? Is there a greater difference with Generation X?
This is like one of the hot topics. It's all over the news. I think there are some commonalities there, and certainly in terms of their share numbers, but their commitment to being change agents, I think is a commonality that Generation X does not have in the same way.
All right. How do you, back to millennials, how do you garner trust and respect from a millennial? They do not seem to respect or give credibility to prior work experience. I'm assuming this came from someone who's older than a millennial.
I'm assuming too. It's hard. It's hard because they were given, in general, and with all of this, we're talking about generalities, but everybody was a winner, and it was all about building up their self-esteem. And so I think that having individual conversations, pointing out your experience that has led you, I think also doing some presentations and having opportunities for people to share their long and windy career path is important, and to talk about who are the people that mentored us, who are the people that sponsored us, what are the forks in the road where we had to make a choice, what resilience, what are the challenges we faced, and how did we get over it? Who helped us get over them and through them? I think that giving that perspective is really important. And I think that sharing those details of our lives are how we build trust with one another.
All right, here's an interesting one. How does spirituality differ by generation? It seems millennials have less of a spiritual foundation / interest. How to bridge that gap?
Yeah. That's a whole nother topic. But I think that certainly baby boomers and silents grew up with religion as a way of life. Generation X saw the whole sex abuse scandal in the church break out. But I think we started to fall. We had more mixed religion marriages among our parents than ever before. And so a lot of Generation Xers don't practice a religion in the same way that generations before them did, and we haven't shared that organized religion with our children. I think it's also now with stores being open and sports on Sundays, it's much harder to buck the system in many ways to be part of an organized religion. And so with all of the other things, But I do believe that millennials and even this Generation Z do have a sense of spirituality, that there's a power greater than themselves, that there's a higher being. But I don't think that they necessarily connect that as much with an organized religion. That answers. So I think they are spiritual. I think they do recognize that. I mean, think about all the terms like it's karma. It's that energy that's going back and forth. And so I think, and there's more appreciation for the different, I think, world religions and our commonality between them than with millennials and Generation Z than perhaps the generations before.
Okay. Another question. Are there differences in the way women versus men from different generations deal with these intergenerational issues?
Well, I think a lot of studies have shown that women are much more relational and look at how is something going to impact everybody. They also tend to be more inclusive and recognizing all the different pieces that are at work and at play. And that's really important in relationships and in multi-generational relationships. Yeah, and so men tend to be more linear, I think, and more goal-oriented. I'm talking very generally, but we really need that inclusiveness, and we need that reliance on one another and recognizing how everything impacts each other. So, and I think it's important to, personally, I think that we need to think about what are the impact that the ramifications on our employees' families too, and what has shaped them too. So I was thinking, I remember for many years there was a bring your child to work day. Like, what if we did a bring your parent to work day and let some of or bring a friend to work day, a grand friend as they're called, not just a grandparent, but a friend who's as close as a grandparent. So how, and try and do that to celebrate the ages and the impact that we have on each other.
Not a bad idea. Here's the next one. It almost seems like millennials need a bit more quote unquote hand-holding in the workplace. How does one empower employees to take ownership? And how does one teach them that, depending on where they go to work, a workplace may not be that place where they handhold?
Yeah, millennials, Generation X mothers went to work and became career women, perhaps, but they were working and they weren't at home in the afternoons in general. When we look at Millennial X, a lot of them had career moms who stopped working in order to be home taking care of their kids. And I think they shifted their wonderful organizational managerial skills to their children, and that's continued down through Generation Z. And so they are used to hand-holding. I think that gently nudging them, you can figure this out. Here's a task, and I want you to think about 3 places you can research it. I want you to come back with, 2 different possible solutions and what the pros and cons are. And giving them little nudges. I think also setting up mentoring relationships, a buddy system where there's someone who's been in the company longer who can help show them the way. It can be helpful too.
Those are some good tips. Here's one. I've advocated for management experience of direct reports, and I'm curious now about managing colleagues older than me. You mentioned that a little bit in one of the slides.
Yeah. Could you repeat
the first part?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So this person says, I've advocated for management experience of direct reports. So it sounds like this person always has tried to bring in direct reports who have management experience, and therefore has ended up with colleagues who report to him or her, but who are older. Right.
The gift of older workers is their experience, often rich experience. They also have a perspective. I just on a parenting, like a parent might be afraid that their kid is not going to go to kindergarten, not be toilet trained in order to go to kindergarten. An experienced parent says, your kid's not going to graduate high school in diapers. It's going to be okay. You know, they're going to grow into it. Older adults have that experience and that wisdom and that perspective about what's worthy of being, you know, of concern and what can you let ride. And they also have been around the block. They know a bunch of different techniques that can be helpful. So that's where I think pulling on that advice and saying, hey, I'm really in a quandary. How do you think we can handle this? What ideas do you have for me is important. And being vulnerable and being authentic and being real and saying, hey, I need help. But then also being able to say, you need to be able to say, hey, this is what we have to do, and I've thought about it, and these are, you know, or this is what the decision is, and this is how we have to move forward, and I appreciate your cooperation with that. And you know, sometimes you just have to be strong and firm. And also I think explaining why. You know, this is, I want you to do this because in the past we've found that if we do it the other way, it doesn't work, and giving a perspective on it to help them understand.
Okay. Of course, in the last 6 minutes, we get a lot more questions coming in. Here's one: the lack of risk taking by one generation group appears to relate to the controlled, supervised, age-slotted group experiences. In days of yore, kids of various ages played games together unsupervised by adults. Do you see today's controlling environment as a detriment?
I think it's a big challenge. I don't know if I'd say it's a detriment. I think it's a real challenge. That creativity that other generations had isn't necessarily there. But there's a collaboration too, and a sense of groups that other generations maybe didn't have as tightly. But in the workplace, it is a challenge, and I think it's going to be even more so.
With Generation Z and beyond?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm wondering, I think it's going to have to swing back. I think we've gone so far one way, it's going to come back now.
Interesting. Here's a related, at one time, 21-year-old people were considered adults. Today's 26-year-olds are not adults. What do you think is the cause of this?
This is such a great question with these emerging adulthood. There's a lot of different factors, I believe. One is that the generation, millennials and Generation Z, well, with millennials, there's more than any other generation, right? And so even applying for college, it can be so much more challenging. And that's part of what I think has led to all of these structured activities. Parents were hoping if my kid was successful playing on a sport, if my kid was really awesome at the debate team, they would get a scholarship. And so parents pushed and kind of pigeonholed kids in hopes of their getting a scholarship to college. So that's one part of it. But also with the longevity bonus, I think kids are taking a year to go do a gap year, studying abroad, doing service before getting into college. And likewise, when they graduate college, taking a year to do some type of work like that, volunteer work or service work, or before going into the workplace. Also because it's so competitive, getting master's degrees or even doctorates is more important than ever before. Even doing double and triple majors is more important than ever before. And so all of that combined with this longevity bonus, they know they're going to be working for into their 70s, which no college graduate ever thought they're going to be working in their 70s, but that is true for these millennials. And so they have time. They have another 50 years. What difference does 1 or 2 more years work make? In the workplace, there's more older workers, and so there aren't necessarily the jobs that are available that there were in previous generations. Millennials might not want to do the tasks, the menial tasks, and work their way up the ladder. They never had to work their way up any ladder or earn their keep in many ways. And so that's another piece that's playing into it. And then just the cost of paying off college debt. It's hard to be holding down a low-paying job and paying off the debt and paying for an apartment to live independently. And then buying a house is just so much more percentage-wise than ever before. And so it's really hard to do a down payment. Actually, some banks are setting up systems where grandparents can gift money for their grandchildren for a down payment, which is kind of a neat policy.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think we have time for one last question here. How does an employee's cultural influence affect some of the characteristics that millennials and Gen X display? Can some of those characteristics be mitigated by cultural influences?
Yeah, I mean, I took a whole class on ethnicities and the impact it has on the family ethnicity and the impact it has on who we are. Ethnicity is a huge thing. Our culture is a huge for immigrants and first generation, it's a huge impact on who they are as individuals. By second generation, it's diminished, and third generation, it's negligible. But if you're working with immigrants and first generation, that culture is going to have a huge impact, just like all the other different theories that I put before you. And so understanding their culture is important. And so doing some cultural days where people can come in and share about their cultures, just at an insurance company that is doing them, I think, like every Wednesday, and they have different food and music from the different cultures that are represented there. So it's pretty neat. But understanding what are the values and the work ethics that go with the different cultures is really critical. So again, when we're talking about culture, when we're talking about generations, we're talking in like these broad sweeps, and we have to understand that it all comes down to individuals too.
Right. Okay. Well, many thanks to you, Andrea, for sharing your time and vast
Thank
knowledge
you.
with us in this topic. And thanks to all of you for joining us out there. A recording of this presentation will be available on the Holy Cross alumni website within a week, and I will send out an email to all of you when it's posted. You'll also receive a short email survey, probably this afternoon, and I encourage you to share your feedback with us. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me in the alumni office. Stay tuned for more career webinars in the months to come, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Be well.